just
Okay,
didn't know if you found anything out about it.
I'd like to welcome everyone to the 6th Osage Nation Congress 2019 TziZho Session. It is September 3rd, 2019. The time is 10 a.m. A little bit different, just opening day. I invited Mowgli Lookout to come and say a few words, and then he will pray, and we will then have a prayer song. So, Uncle Mowgli, if you would start, appreciate it.
I'd like to address each and every one of you. This is my first time saying a prayer. This means a lot to me, to say the prayer for our government. I feel like that I have to wear my blanket or like I'm doing physical stuff, but didn't want to wear it over my shoulders because that wasn't the way I was raised. I don't know where that came from. But we have it now, and that seems to be proper to wear it over your shoulders like that. But we do a lot of things in relation to our culture. The things that we do, we've changed, and we're just going along with that change. And this is one example of it, is a Congress. We didn't have that when I was growing up. So you people do fine work. I think that the nation will be a great nation one of these days because we have such diligent people that do a fine job. And I consider this a privilege. I consider it something that I hope I can do. And right now I'm kind of nervous, but anyway, that's what this means to me. And Joe, thank you very much.
Oh.
And I'll pray. Itati wakanda wakanda ishinke. Ampade ankalape. Nikoshia. Ankotape. Ampa hashita. Kota hamonja omoi pikishi. Etsi. Wawatatap. Wawatat pata. The dali wadakshi wenashki minkshe the dali wadakshi komra. Waint kistomai watatsel pata de owen minkshe. The kontea de wachmane akai. Kistomai nikashia pata kipatse ta. The dali wadakshi tata the dali spijonikshi pata de. Eko eke huda bit says Ali Ajami. The Konsea de Intati Wakanda, Dake Wadaki Stone Papi, the Dali Wadakshi, Dano Wadaki Kampi Kumra. Now, went to Nikashia, but Tahade, the Ha Konkodakshi, the Dali Wadakshi, Dano Wadaki Kampi Kumra. The Konsea de Kashkado, Ankona, Pia Hadi, Ali Wadakshi, Tato Wadaki Kampi Kumra. The Konsea de Ina, Indate Elompae, Kinampe, Dak Ea Kia, Pedi, Ali Wadakshi, Tato Wadaki Kampi Kumra. The Konsea de Wahai Ankai, Washaji Nikoshia, Patahade, Ampe, Toin de Haing Shei, the Ki, the Wadaki, Tato Wadaki Kampi Kumra. The Konsea Hade Wahai Ankai, we broken that's that the old margin, what as a cashki passing at Tato with a kikantanik shell, Pataha, like a water could be Ankoda. The Konsea Hade, doors a skinny Kashia, Pataha, Ekoiki, who the bit say, what a kishton puppy, the Dali Wadak there. Ampe, doing the hang shell, Kashank, Nanzadashi, Kako, and Nikashika, mine be Ankoda. Who a heck along the other Wadak Jinkaji Pashki, Ohu Hekela, the Hade Wadakshi, Tato Wadaki Kampi Komba, Wadila Wach by the Kakela, the Hade Wadakshi, Tato Wadaki Kampi Komba, Owi Brakana, that's a Walamaji, Alia Ekipski, I but she showish Pahonic Share Patahadi, Dali Wadakshi, Tato Wadaki Kampi Komba, I ain't that say, Owi Brakana, Kashana, Kakon Kakipshana, amen.
I'd like to address our speaker and assistant speaker and Congress. Like our elder said here, it's an honor to be here today, to be doing this, for our people here, our Congress. And the song here that we're singing, this is a place of Osage people. And we could sing it probably, a lot of different songs, but we're appreciative today that, I asked Rock to come help us out. And his late father, Brownie Pipesim, composed the song, and it's got Osage words in it. And it says, Seinojinga, Wakanda Iki Naji. And we have a saying we say, Iwiki Naji. We depend upon someone, but in this one, we're dependent upon the Creator here, God here, to lead us and to lead you all as our leaders of the Osage people. And so we thought it would be appropriate to sing that kind of song in here. Has our language, just like we have our language, we have our culture, language, and we're fortunate people to have it, because a lot of tribes don't have what we have. They have stories, they have oral stories, but they don't have this. So just wanted to say that much. That way you know what's in the song, composed by the late Brownie Pipesim. Hope, thank you.
Thank you, Van. Next item on the agenda is the executive, roll call, please.
Congressman Bighorse.
Present.
Congresswoman Edwards.
Present.
Congresswoman Goodfox.
Present.
Congresswoman Lemon.
Present.
Congressman Maker.
Here.
Congressman Mason.
Present.
Congressman Potts.
Present.
Congresswoman Pratt.
That's you.
Congresswoman Stabler.
Here.
Congressman Walker.
Here.
Congresswoman Whitehorn.
Here.
Speaker Tillman.
Here.
Assistant Chief Redcorn.
Present. We do have a quorum. I'd like to welcome everyone. Next on the agenda is the executive message from Principal Chief Jeffrey Standing Bear.
Good morning, Mr. Speaker, members of the 6th Osage Congress, and Assistant Chief Redcorn. It is well known a large threat to our revenue has come from the current governor of the state of Oklahoma. United with the other Indian nations, we are now engaged in a common agenda on how to proceed. I have requested the leadership of the Oklahoma Indian Gaming Association to appear before the Commerce, Gaming, and Land Committee, and Chairwoman Goodfox has made September 11 available for a report from the OIGA on the statewide status of the matters at hand. In the meantime, it is my recommendation to the Congress to exercise extra caution in this session's appropriation laws. Although we believe the state's deadline of January 1, 2020 will come and pass without major disruption to our gaming operations, we would be foolish not to prepare for events and outcomes which are not favorable to us. Accordingly, I asked the Chief Financial Officer of Osage Casinos for calculations on different scenarios applying different gaming compact fees to casino operations and how these would change the gaming distributions to the Osage Treasury. Governor Stitt has publicly stated his idea of what a compact fee should be, but he has not sent any formal letter reflecting what he has said in the press. He obviously believes the present fees of 4 to 6% of electronic gaming and 10% of table games is not high enough to keep the Oklahoma Indian gaming in its present status. So back to what our gaming CFO tells us. A scenario where the gaming machines and table games pay 25% to the state will result in nothing short of a massive reduction in the projected revenue, which is contained in the Congress resolution on what is available for appropriation. A fee of 20% has the same effect, and fees of lesser amounts still have strong impacts on health programs, educational scholarships, language and culture programs, our schools, our museum, and much more. The amounts we are talking about should not be discussed in public, as showing the opposition our condition is not advisable. Let us just say we will not spare any effort or resource to protect our people. There are over 25 bills and resolutions shown on today's Congress agenda, and the subject matter of most of them is appropriation of money. More legislation will be filed in the coming days. Among these is the appropriation request for our school system. As we have said, there's no better place to change the future and the present than in the mind, body, and spirit of a young child. Here is our past, our present, our tomorrow. The immersion school, the Poskonkotappi, has every classroom filled with children, and there is a waiting list. We should fully support this school and our 4 early education nests, no matter what happens. The same must be said of our language and our culture programs, health care, and care for our elders. These obligations are clearly stated in our Osage Constitution. The threat against revenue today presents the opportunity for this Congress to reevaluate the priorities set out in our Constitution. I believe the language is strong as to what the priorities should be, and I look forward to working with those of you who share in that belief. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Chief Standing Bearer, thank you for those words. First of all, before I get started, we were talking about students in education. I've invited students from the Pahuska High School who are up on our balcony, and I would like to introduce those students. And when I did this, I reached out to the superintendent and I asked her, it was kind of quick, and going forward, we'd like to do it in Hominy and do it in Fairfax Public Schools as well. But we have 3 young ladies. We're supposed to have 3 young men who didn't get their permission slip or something turned in. But however, we do have these 3 young ladies that have joined us this morning. And I just want to start by introducing them first. We have Mia Jones. Mia, if you would stand up, please. Mia is 17 years old, and you're a senior. That is correct. Okay, next we have Jackie Bighorse. Jackie, welcome. Jackie is 15 years old, and she is in the 10th grade. And finally, we have Lily Jones, 15, who is also in the 10th grade. I want to welcome you all and tell you how important education is to each and every one of you. Because what's going to happen is we're going to have a generation go by. That's 20 years. And 17 and 15 and 15 is going to be 37, 35, and 35. And we need individuals, Osage students, to consider working for the Osage Nation government. So we're glad you are here. You were asked if you had an interest in business, politics, and government, and here you are. And I was always taught that we cherish our children. You are our children, and we cherish you, and we're watching you, and we observe you in and out of the classroom. We're glad you are here. You belong here. You're always welcome here. And I want to say thank you for your presence here today. Again, I would like to welcome Chief, Assistant Principal Chief, the 6th Osage Nation Congress, members of the executive staff who are here, constituents, visitors, and those of you that are listening via the internet. I also want to again thank Mowgli Lookout and Van Big Horse. I want to thank them from the bottom of my heart for their dedication to our language and to our culture. They've dedicated their lives, and I recognize that, and I know you do as well. But to me, that put us in a good place. That put us in the right place. That gets us off to a good start. It was a beautiful prayer, and that was a beautiful song. And I felt the power in that prayer and the power in those words and those lyrics. And I want to thank Mowgli and Van once again for being here today. Chief Standing Bearer referred to the pieces of legislation that we have before us, 25 plus pieces of legislation and resolutions that we will consider in committee. We also have roughly $50 million that we're going to appropriate to certain governmental programs. And so it is with the wisdom of this Congress and the considerations of the principal chief that we move forward with the different pieces of legislation before us. It is the budget season, and that is where we are gathered here for these next 24 days to do the things for the Osage Nation and for the Osage people. Sometimes I've heard people ask and say, is this government working? I've heard that. I've heard it in these walls. We have members here that will tell you in question, is this government working? And they will give you evidence and arguments. And it's a young government, 15, 16 years old. And so, our Constitution is do what's proper and do what's right for all Osage people. And Chief, it's our job to make this government work on our watch. To make this government work. The Osage people expect it. The Osage people demand it. And the Osage people deserve it. We have to make this work. And it's going to take all of us to accomplish this. You heard Chief Standing Bearer talk about the gaming compact and the renegotiation with the state of Oklahoma. I reached out to Chief, a month ago. He and I have had the fortunate to be able to meet with Chief Standing Bearer in a one-on-one with he and Assistant Chief Redcorn. And we've met several times. And I'm thankful to Almighty God for these meetings. I understand more than I ever have of what goes on a daily basis with the chief of this nation. It's not an easy job. It's a tough job. It's a lot of stress. And as Speaker of the Congress, you get information now that I never received as just a member of Congress. And so the seriousness of when the governor of Oklahoma wants these renegotiations and the impact that it will have, the possibilities of the reduction in funding for our government to operate, we have to seriously consider our priorities, as Chief Standing Bearer mentioned. We have different scenarios that we have looked at. He told you the percentages. And we've even considered a doomsday scenario. And I think if we're smart, we have to consider and say, what if something happened to gaming? What if it's over? What happens? We have $30 million in the permanent fund. That's it. It's enough to last us 6 months, 7 months. It's all we have. Other tribes, you have heard, it was mentioned to me the other day, there's a big tribe in Oklahoma that has $700 million. It's going to last them 3 to 4 years. We have $30 million. We need to grow and we need to save, especially with the threats that we are now undertaking from the state of Oklahoma. Our Bible study this morning talked about wisdom. We need to be wise. We need to be very, very wise and pray. Having said that, one last thing I would like for us to do as a Congress as we move forward. Let's don't be so critical of each other, and let's encourage each other. Thank you. Next item on the agenda, bills and resolutions on first reading. Congresswoman Edwards.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Chief, Assistant Chief, members of Congress, officials, and guests, good morning. I'm reading in ONCA 1960. That's an act to authorize and appropriate $8,500,000 to the Osage Nation Higher Education Scholarship Fund. In furtherance of cherishing our children, this is the funding for higher education scholarships for the coming spring, summer, and next fall calendar school year. The support documentation for this bill has been distributed. The amount keeps the fund at the level that it is currently, meaning that there is a cushion of funding for at least one semester. Thank you. ONCA 1961 is an act to authorize and appropriate $4,300,000 to the Osage Nation Member Health Benefit Fund from fiscal year 2020 tribal revenue for direct assistance to Osage members 65 years of age and older. The $1,000 annual benefit or Medigap Insurance Plan F and Part D premiums as set forth in the Osage Nation Health Benefit Act, found at 16 ONC Section 3101 exsec, and to establish an alternate effective date. Again, this figure represents the amount of money needed to provide for the $1,000 health annual benefit for our over 65 elders, or to alternative allow them to elect Medigap Insurance Plan F and Part D. Going forward, those plans may change. We will hear more about that from our carrier, from the person that, the entity that handles that. So more information is forthcoming. This is the appropriation just for the senior piece to the Health Benefit Fund. Thank you.
Thank you, Congresswoman Edwards. Congressman Maker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, Assistant Chief, Standing Bear, all those in present today. Reading in ONCA 1962, an act to authorize and appropriate $20,000 for the purchase and placement of a headstone at the St. Francis Cemetery in St. Paul, Kansas, to commemorate a mass Osage burial site and to establish an alternate effective date. I'd like to say a few words about this, if I could, just quickly. I have actually been to this site a couple of years ago, and this is something that really needs to be addressed. We sent the documentation out to the members of Congress, and for those here listening, the only thing up there is just a sandstone with it's carved in block letters, Indian graves. That's all it is. And from some of the history of that, It's mostly children, and no one really knows exactly how many graves there are. There could be 30, they say there were 30 children who died of smallpox that year, back in the 1800s. And then they also said there could be as many as 300 graves there. And so this is something I think we really need to do to take care of the sacred side of our people, which is our Osage way, our culture. We've always taken care of our those that went on to the next world. So, thank you.
Thank you, Congressman Maker. Reading in ONCA 19-63, an act to amend 26 ONC Section 14-105 of the Osage Nation Permanent Fund Act to authorize utilization of funds by appropriation for government operations and government services during a financial emergency and to establish an alternate effective date. Congresswoman Edwards.
Mr. Speaker, ONCA 1964 is a work in progress. Here is the latest information I have that I want to distribute to everybody. I also would like to make some revisions, so without objection, I'd like to hold that to read in tomorrow. And I'll be sending out the light reading for everyone. It's kind of got messed up on the travels. ONCA 1965 is an act to authorize and appropriate $1 million to the museum fund and to establish an alternate effective date. The previous Congress established a museum fund in an effort to put money back to create a fund that would allow for additional exhibit space and adequate storage space for the collection, the museum. And the good news is that the fund is almost empty because we appropriated funds, the Congress appropriated funds to start looking at some architectural drawings in hopes that there would be some matching funding or some additional funding available. So this is an effort to replenish that fund so that when there's an opportunity to look for matching funds or to move forward with construction of additional space, exhibit space, storage space, we will have some money in the fund as seed money. So that's that. Thank you. The next bill is ONCA 1966, which is an act to authorize and appropriate $14 million to the Osage Nation Health Benefit Fund for 2020 revenue for direct assistance to Osage members under 65 years of age, as set forth in the Osage Nation Health Benefit Act 16 ONC Section 3101 exec, and to establish an alternate effective date. Again, you've been given some support documentation that seems to indicate that that is the amount that needs to be in this fund. I think that that support documentation may be incorrect. I've written to the treasurer and to the chief's staff, and I'm awaiting response, but I do believe that that number hopefully is inaccurate and is too high. But we need to study that in committee and understand exactly what kind of commitment we need to make for that year. So that is the reason for that number, knowing that it will probably move. Thank you.
Thank you, Congresswoman Edwards. I'd like to read in ONCA 19-67, an act to provide an appropriation to the limited liability company Osage Nation Ranch, LLC, in the amount of $175,000 for bison fencing and to establish an alternate effective date. Congressman Potts.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to read an ONCA 1968, an act to authorize and appropriate $135,000 to the Capital Asset Fund equipment purchases and to establish an alternate effective date. ONCA 1969, an act to provide an appropriation for cultural donations in the amount of $93,500 for fiscal year 2020 and to establish an alternate effective date. ONCA 1970, an act to authorize and appropriate $173,673 to the merit payments in accordance with the Workforce Pay for Performance Act and to establish an alternate effective date. ONCA 1971, an act to provide an appropriation to the Osage Press for fiscal year 2020 in the amount of $584,081 and to establish an alternate effective date. ONCA 1972, an act to authorize and appropriate the sum of $300,000 to the Restricted Real Property Repurchase Fund and to establish an alternate effective date. ONCA 1973, an act to provide an appropriation to the village committees or village committee funds in the amount of $305,220 for fiscal year 2020 and to establish an alternate effective date. ONCA 1974, an act to provide an appropriation to the legislative branch of the Osage Nation for fiscal year 2020 in the amount of $2,162,450 and to establish an alternate effective date. ONCA 1975, an act to authorize and appropriate $500,000 to the Burial Assistance Fund and to establish an alternate effective date. ONCA 1976, an act to provide an appropriation to the Office of the Attorney General of the Osage Nation for fiscal year 2020 and in the amount of $1,786,099 and to establish an alternate effective date. And ONCA 1977, an act to provide an appropriation to the Executive Branch of the Osage Nation for fiscal year 2020 in the amount of $26,037,782 and to establish an alternate effective date.
Thank you, Congressman Potts. Congresswoman Stabler.
Good morning, all. I'd like to read in ONCA 1978, an act to amend the Independent Press Act to establish alternate board members and to make the editor a higher employee position instead of an appointed position, to establish a shield law, and to establish an alternate effective date. I'd also like to read in ONCA 1979, an act to amend the Criminal Procedure Code to update the jury selection process and to establish an alternate effective date.
Thank you, Congresswoman Stabler. Congresswoman Whitehorn.
Good morning, everybody. I'm happy to be here. Happy you guys are too. So I'm reading in, find it, ONCA 1980, an act to amend the Economic Development Fund at 10 ONC Section 102 and to establish an alternate effective date. And I'm going to continue with ONCA 1981, an act to appropriate $1 million to the Economic Development Fund and to establish an alternate effective date.
Thank you, Congresswoman Whitehorn. Congresswoman Edwards.
Reading in ONCA 1982, which is an act to amend 19 ONC Section 3106 of the Osage Nation Workforce Pay for Performance Act to authorize base pay adjustments and merit recognition and to establish an alternate effective date. This is a bill that's made it through Congress several times in most likely a very similar fashion, just have never gotten it to the end. So hopefully we will hear more on that and come to agreement on what we need to do with respect to our merit bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Congresswoman Edwards. Congresswoman Whitehorn.
Thank you. Reading in ONCR 1918, a resolution to authorize the principal chief of the Osage Nation to execute real property leases and right-of-way easements on restricted lands and trust lands on behalf of the Osage Nation through October 1, 2020.
Thank you, Congresswoman Whitehorn. Congressman Potts.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Bring in ONCR 1919, a resolution to reject Governor Stitt's claim the gaming compact between the Osage Nation and the state of Oklahoma must be renegotiated.
Thank you, Congressman Potts. Congresswoman Pratt.
Thank you, Speaker. Good morning, everyone. I'm reading in ONCR 1920, A resolution to authorize a limited waiver of sovereign immunity from suit and a consent to jurisdiction to Pharmacy Providers of Oklahoma, PPOK, for pharmaceutical distribution services and pharmacy administrative organization services. Thank you.
Thank you, Congresswoman Pratt. Next item on the, well, let me assign these to committee, beginning with ONCA 1960, Education, ONCA 1961, Health and Social Services, ONCA 1962, Culture, ONCA 1963, Government Operations, ONCA 1965, Culture, ONCA 1966, Health and Social Services, ONCA 1967, Commerce, Gaming, and Land, ONCA 1968, Appropriations, ONCA 1969, Culture, ONCA 1970, Appropriations, ONCA 1971, Appropriations, ONCA 1972, Commerce, Gaming, and Land, ONCA 1973, Culture, ONCA 1974, Appropriations, ONCA 1975, Culture, ONCA 1976, Appropriations, ONCA 1977, Appropriations, ONCA 1978, Appropriations, ONCA 1979, Government Operations, ONCA 1980, Commerce, Gaming, and Land, ONCA 1981, Commerce, Gaming, and Land, ONCA 1982, Government Operations, ONCR 1918, Commerce, Gaming, and Land, ONCR 1919, Commerce, Gaming, and Land, ONCR 1920, Government Operations. Next item on the agenda, General Order Day 2, where amendments made. Congressman Mason.
Your assignment to ONCA 1964.
Oh,
I didn't read it in yet.
it's on hold until tomorrow.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. Congresswoman Stabler.
Speaker, I have a question on ONC 1978. You sent it to appropriations. There's not a monetary bill.
Do you have a motion?
Motion to move it to GovOps.
Second.
There's a motion and a second. All those in favor, any discussion? All those in favor of moving ONCA 1978 from appropriations to government operations signify by saying yes.
Yes.
Any opposed, say no. 1978 is moved to the Government Operations Committee. Next item on the agenda, General Order Day 2, where amendments may be proposed. ONCA 18-76, an act to provide an appropriation in the amount of $194,346 to the Capital Asset and Improvement Fund for property management and improvements of the entire Hominy Village, not limited to the Hominy Village Square, and to establish an alternate effective date. Sponsor is Congresswoman Pratt. Congresswoman Pratt.
Speaker, I would request that remain on General Order Day 2 until tomorrow's agenda. I need some more information and possible withdrawal for tomorrow's agenda. That's my motion.
Is that a motion?
Yes, sir.
Second.
Motion and a second. Rule suspension, no discussion. All those in favor of the motion signify by saying yes.
Yes.
Any opposed, say no. ONCA 1876 will remain for tomorrow on General Order Day 2. Next item on the agenda, motions and notices. Do we have any motions and notices? Congresswoman Good Fox?
Commerce, Gaming, and Land Committee meeting will be today from 1 to 2:30.
Thank you. Congresswoman Taylor?
We have a training for members of Congress that begins at 2:45 and will last somewhere between there and 6 o'clock.
Thank you. Congresswoman Edwards?
I move to go into the committee of the whole to discuss notice and the proposed agenda for the upcoming three-branch summit.
There's a motion on the floor
Second.
and a second. Could you repeat the motion, please?
It's to go into the committee of the whole to discuss notice and the proposed agenda for the upcoming three-branch summit.
There is a motion and a second. Roll call, please.
Discussion?
Is there discussion? Discussion, my fault.
I have, I believe, a proposed agenda, and I have some inquiries. It doesn't have a time, I think, a time on it, and I had some inquiries from constituents as to can they attend, what time is it, so I wanted to hear about that. Also the agenda.
Any further discussion? Roll call.
Congresswoman Edwards.
Yes?
Congresswoman Good Fox.
Yes.
Congresswoman Lemon.
Yes.
Congressman Maker.
Yes.
Congressman Mason.
Yes.
Congressman Potts.
Yes.
Congresswoman Pratt.
Yes.
Congresswoman Stabler.
Yes.
Congressman Walker.
Yes.
Congresswoman Whitehorn.
Yes.
Congressman Big Horse.
Yes.
Speaker Tillman.
Yes. Motion passes. We are now in committee of the whole. How would we like to begin? Would you like to start?
Oh, sure. So I have a proposed agenda for, I think, did we all get it? For the upcoming three-branch summit. And as I indicated, it didn't have, I don't believe it had a time on it. And I want to make sure that we are going to send out notice and invite the constituents. I understand we have invited some people, but I need more information. I don't really, all I got was that proposed agenda, I believe, and I don't think notice has gone out, so I wanted to understand when all this is happening, and is it through a committee, or is the Congress going to adjourn in session? I'm just trying to get the logistics down.
Any other Congress members? Congressman Potts.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I share many of the same concerns. I have visited with a few members of Congress with this regard. And I think that more work needs to be done at the planning and setting of this agenda. So I too would like to know what our path forward is and what we plan to make of this three-branch summit.
Thank you, Congressman. Congresswoman Pratt, did you ever?
I'm just going to say more of the same. I'm just, a Congress member and I spoke about it this morning, and we're unfamiliar with all the ins and outs of it.
Any others? Okay, I'll begin. Probably, I'm going to say about a month ago, somewhere in early July, I was sitting here and reading over, in my office, reading over just some legislation, and I stumbled upon the judicial evaluation on YouTube. And the evaluation took place up here at the courts. It was November 17th, I believe November 17th, the year 2017. And so the reason I stumbled upon this video is I was researching the judicial branch. And this evaluation lasted approximately an hour and 15 minutes. I actually watched it twice. It was very, very informative. And one of the things that struck me the most is when I started watching the evaluation, the judicial branch was there with their folks. Chief Standing Bear was there, and there was nobody from Congress in attendance. And it was the evaluation. I believe we were given the invitation to be at that evaluation, and for whatever reason, there was no representation from Congress. So, just watching the video, I think just me personally, I could see where it was a disappointment to the government when we have an evaluation for the judicial branch there, and I could sense the disappointment. And you have to watch the video yourself and judge for yourself. But I took away from it that maybe there was that disappointment in the other two branches that I just mentioned. At the end of the video, they had talked about, Chief Standing Bear, you were there, and I'm going to be as accurate as I can be, but you all started discussing the possibility of a three-branch summit where the three branches would get together and talk. And Meredith, Chief Justice Trent, she had mentioned that she thought it would be a wonderful idea to collaborate, learn how to collaborate together as the three branches, but also to maintain their independence. And I think she tasked you, Chief, with to getting the summit together. As I spoke earlier, a lot of things go on in your office, and I know you have that intention to do so, but I thought, you know what? I want to help out. I'm going to reach out to Chief Justice Trent and just kind of see where this thing goes. So that July day, I was sitting in my office, and I called her, and she lives in the state of Washington. And she's a judge out there, sits on the bench. I left a message with her. We played a little bit of phone tag, and we hooked up on the telephone. I said, Chief Justice Trent, this is Speaker Tillman, and the conversation probably lasted 20 minutes, maybe a little more. But I told her, I said, I don't know you. I don't really know who you are. I want to get to know you. And she kind of laughed, and she giggled, and I said, I told her I watched the evaluation on YouTube, and her desire and the executive branch's desire to get a summit, a meeting together with the three branches. Because we interact as a legislative body, we interact with the executive branch almost on a daily basis. I don't really interact with the judicial branch. I said, I would like for you to come, and I would like to listen to you, and you tell me, you tell us how the judicial branch works in this government, because I really want to know, because I don't. I can read about it, I can research about it, and she was very flattered and very willing and very enthusiastic about the idea of a three-branch summit. I said, well, let's start, and let's just be as informal as we can. It's not an open meeting. I want to invite the members of Congress. If they want to be there, they can. If they don't have to be, but I want to be there, and I've spoken to other members of Congress about this, and they want to be there. And Chief Standing Bear in the executive branch supports this summit. So I put together, she gave me a list of topics. I had some topics. Chief Standing Bear looked at the little agenda that we have, and I made the recommendation. I said, why don't we all get together? There's no meetings on the 10th in the afternoon. It's not a formal meeting. It's just let's sit down, let's have some food, and let's discuss the topics, the agenda that I sent you. And she was very, very happy about it, excited about it. She's preparing. Chief Standing Bear also said this is good. This is what we need to do, a step in the right direction. So as Speaker of the Congress, I took that on. And I thought, wow, what a wonderful start to just three branches of government working together, collaborating together, but also understanding our independence. It was something as simple and innocent as that. And now I have people that are unhappy, not happy with it, and I understand that. I get that. But that's all it was. And even Chief Standing Bear, he told me this is good. I look forward to a summit too, the second one, because there's so many different topics that we can talk about and discuss and learn how to work together. That's what it was. Something as simple, something as Osage to Osage to Osage, the three branches sitting down, having a meal, and talking about how the government works in their eyes. So probably a little more to it than that, but that's kind of where we are. So I'm being criticized, and that's okay. It comes with the chair. It's all right. But I welcome each and every one of you to attend. I think it would be helpful and very an educational experience. So that's where I am. And it's Tuesday the 10th. I believe beginning at 5 o'clock, we're going to eat, and then we're going to sit down across from each other and go through the topics and discuss. So I'm encouraged and excited about it, and I hope you are as well. Congresswoman Edwards.
So back to the discussion about the notice, and so is the public invited to the dinner?
No,
Okay, but they are invited to attend the meeting?
no. It's not a meeting. It's just a get-together, informal get-together. It's not a scheduled meeting.
Well, I'm not familiar with that, because I don't know that Congress has ever, I mean, we've been over this numerous times in our history, and we've been very careful that if everyone attends from Congress, the majority of Congress attend anything, we've always noticed it as a meeting and made it a public meeting. So are we diverging from our rules, or I'm just unfamiliar with this? And I'm concerned because I know that there's some constituents that would like to come.
I understand. As we go further, there could be a possibility of opening it up. I thought the intimate company with just the three branches for the first one would serve us well. I understand your disapproval. I have your email, and what your email says is that's not a direction I want to go. I don't want to read your email, but it was very, very discerning to me. And a matter of fact, almost a little improper.
Well, I will always seek to uphold the ideals that I think are important, which include having open meetings to discuss matters of public importance. So I didn't intend to disappoint you, but I am feeling strongly that this should be a publicly noticed meeting and that constituents should be allowed to listen in, and that that we notice it, and that we have an agenda, particularly since it's on congressional letterhead, what I received, that we have an agenda that doesn't put any of us in an uncomfortable position of discussing matters that could come before the court and would perhaps put the court in a position to have to recuse. I just don't want to do that to them. I am very much in favor of talking about VAWA, which was one of the things that was on the agenda. And I'm in favor of discussing ways to better communicate, how processes may have changed this year, given that we are now not appropriating federal dollars. I'm all for all that kind of discussion. But when we get into the specifics of interpreting the Constitution and how people interpret the Constitution, I really don't think it matters how I interpret the Constitution, because we have a Constitution that tells us what our process is for that, and that would include going to the judicial branch to have them be the final arbiter. Before that, of course, we have the law that says that we work with the Attorney General. And it's my understanding that the Attorney General is not invited. I would like for her office to be invited. And I think it's important that if we're going to have this kind of conversation, which I'm not objecting to, that it be inclusive. That's my desire.
Thank you. Congressman Potts.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I applaud your efforts to get us as far as we have been. I, too, agree with the comment that I don't really know the Chief Justice that well. I would like to know some of the colleagues at this table better. I would like to know members of the executive branch better. I don't think there's anything wrong with a three-branch summit that puts us all in the same room as leaders of this nation to find a common ground of how we can better serve the Osage people. I agree that the second we put an agenda to it and we start discussing decisions of this court, interpretations of those opinions, and how we can move forward together, I think that that constitutes an agenda and puts us in violation of an Open Meetings Act. If that doesn't, then I question why we notice interim meetings in our own body where 3 or more members of Congress get together without any plan of action. But we're going to put more than a quorum, hopefully, come to this dinner. And somehow that doesn't constitute a meeting that needs to be properly noticed. I think that needs to be addressed, and I've spoken with some individuals, including our legislative council, that says varying opinions. But I think the standard has to be that if the decision makers of this nation are going to be in the body or in one room, that's supposed to be in public. We aren't supposed to be doing the people's business in private. I think that we need to address the public nature of the meeting, and I also believe that the agenda items on the agenda put us in a very difficult spot to maintain that independence. It's one thing to say, yes, we respect that independence, but we're putting ourselves up, we're setting ourselves up to violate that independence by the agenda as it is, I believe. So I would very much be in favor of making this a public meeting and revisiting the agenda. But again, Speaker, I appreciate the work you've done. I agree. We need to be in the same room. We need to be getting to know each other. The people have put their trust in us to lead this government, and I agree with you. We need to get together. And I think if it were just a dinner to get to know each other, as you said, Mr. Speaker, I think that's a great idea. But I think as the agenda sets right now, we're setting ourselves up to violate those separations of powers.
Thank you, Congressman. Congressman Baker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yes, I think it's a great idea to have all the branches get together. We've never done it before, and I think that's probably one of the problems that everybody sees of having this. But if there's parts of this meeting that maybe are confidential, we would probably have to have an executive session like we usually do in any kind of meeting if we're going to discuss a lot of opinions that in detail aren't open to the public. So I would say we could go ahead and have this and have the dinner, and part of it can be open to the public, and then part of it would go into executive session like we always do. Thank you.
Thank you, Congressman Baker. Just like to also, the topics that are on the agenda, 90% of those, they came from Chief Justice Drent. And I think she's astute enough and smart enough to know that whatever we're going to do to conduct this meeting, nothing was going to jeopardize us, get us into trouble. I would hope that the judicial branch, she was doing this out of the goodwill of her heart in an effort to get together and have a meal and discuss. We can change the agenda. We can drop the agenda. We can just have some food and get to know each other. All it was. And I love the idea. I'm still excited about it. Is Mr. Gill available? And then I'll get to you, Congresswoman Whitehorn. Mr. Gill, you've been listening.
Yes, sir, I have.
In your wisdom, could you comment on any specific violations that you know of?
Well, I have the Open Meetings Act in front of me, and I'm reading the definition of a meeting.
Could you speak into the microphone, please?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. The definition of a meeting, it says that meetings shall not apply to social meetings, attendance at meetings called by other public bodies, or to attendance at or travel to conventions or workshops of members of a public body, at which there is no meeting of the body then intentionally convened, if there is no vote or other action taken regarding over any matter over which the public body has supervision, control, jurisdiction, or advisory power. Meetings shall also not apply to unofficial, casual, or social meetings of members of Congress, whether or not legislation is discussed, if there is no vote or official action taken. So, I mean, this appears to me to be a social meeting of the members of Congress along with the judicial branch and the executive branch. It doesn't look like there's any intention to take action or to come to any conclusion over a matter of which Congress has jurisdiction, control, or advisory power. So that's my reading of it, sir.
So let me ask you a question. Are we violating any laws?
Not that I can see.
Thank you. Congresswoman Whitehorn.
Well, I'm glad we're discussing this because I too think a summit, a three-branch summit is a good idea. The definition of a summit is a meeting. So summit is defined as a meeting, doesn't say it's social. Most of the definitions I looked at didn't say it was a social gathering. It is an official of your heads of state or heads of government or heads of executive corporations. So a summit is at the very top. I realize that Mr. Gill just read our open meetings law, but the Constitution says all proceedings of the Osage Nation Congress shall be open and public, except in the case that require confidentiality. In such cases, an executive session may be convened when duly voted upon in an open meeting. So I'm trying to get myself beyond the constitutional language. When this body gathers in a summit, it is a meeting. And we haven't noticed it properly. We've excluded the Osage public from it. Hasn't been noticed by the rules of the Open Meetings Act. So I think that the Constitution for me is what I have to take a step up from in our Osage law. So I agree a summit's a good idea. I'm not trying to be critical of the branches coming together. The problem I'm having is procedurally, we are the body that makes the law of this nation, and I feel like we should abide by the law of the nation. And I'd like to hear also, I realize we have Mr. Gill here, but I'd like to hear from our Attorney General. She happens to be sitting in the audience today, and hear whether this is a meeting or not, and whether we can have meetings away from the public. Because I don't think the Constitution says we can, and I believe the Constitution gives us an allowance to go into executive sessions. Also, our rules follow that same guide, the rules of procedure that we're constitutionally able to put forth. I would like to continue to have the summit. I would like to see an agenda that won't walk us into places we may not, that we should probably not go. And get together and do what your aspiration is to bring the branches together. I do support that, Speaker. I'm not critical of the idea. I just think we need to look at the agenda and properly notice the meeting and that the public should be able to come.
Thank you. Mr. Gill, did you have
Yes, I just wanted to say that obviously the agenda would be determinant of whether or not this is an official meeting of Congress or a committee of Congress or not. Again, I don't see that anything on the agenda currently will violate the Open Meetings Act. I'm happy to have the Attorney General weigh in. Absolutely, I think
Sure.
her opinion is important.
Thank you. Ms. Wells?
Thank you, Speaker, Assistant Chief, Member
Speaking
of
to that.
Congress. I'm sorry.
You're fine.
I don't usually have a problem being heard, so. Speaker, I think if the agenda reflected what you said, there would not be an issue of getting together, eating, talking. It would definitely fall under the exception to the open meeting rule. If you want to call it a workshop instead of a summit or a meeting, I think your agenda and calling it a summit is where we get into crossing certain lines or possibly crossing the line or going right up to the line. And I don't think that's your intent at all. But I think the agenda needs to reflect what you have stated here today as to what you wish to happen.
Thank you. So to make you a little more comfortable and also other parties, if we just change it from summit to workshop, we're good?
If the Chief Justice is comfortable discussing what, she has on the agenda, that's up to her.
Okay.
But
Okay.
yes, you can have a social meeting that is, it's under the Open Meetings Act and not a violation. But you can't have a summit, you can't have a meeting without crossing that line. As to the constitutional language, that's the same thing. You go to that line and cross it just based on the agenda and the title.
Thank you, Holly.
Thank you.
Congresswoman Good Fox.
Move to come out of committee of a whole.
So motion and a second. All those in favor signify by saying yes.
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 Any opposed, say no. We're now out of committee of a whole. Any other motions and notices? Congresswoman Good Fox.
Move to adjourn until 10 a.m. tomorrow.
Second.
Motion and a second. All those in favor say yes.
Yes.
We're adjourned.